So ribs are one of those things that everyone thinks they should be smoked. But that's not necessarily true. You can make fantastic ribs at home without the need of a smoker in your home oven. They're going to be a little bit different, but they're still going to be fantastic. Today, I'm going to show you how to make a rub, the sauce, and cook the ribs properly so you too can make delicious rib at home. Tag along and let's get cooking. For this recipe, we'll start by making our dry rub. We're going to do 1 part spices, 1 part brown sugar, and 1 part salt. In this particular case, I'm using paprika, chili powder, garlic powder, and black pepper. You can definitely use different spices if you want to, like cumin, coriander, cinnamon, or anything else you may want to. The important part is the ratios. 1 part spices, 1 part brown sugar, 1 part salt. Once everything's in a mixing bowl, we're going to give it a little mixy mix to make sure there is no clumps, especially because of the brown sugar. It can clump up quite easily. You can make as much or as little of this spice mix as you want. It would be great on some chicken, some salmon, and many other things. So make some extra and keep it in an airtight container for next time. Once our spice mix is done, we're going to rub our ribs with it. In this case, I'm using baby back ribs. Ribs usually come with a thick membrane in the back that's very chewy and will not break down during the cooking process. The easiest way to take it off is to take a fork, put it under the membrane, pull it a little bit like that, and once you get some off the meat, take a paper towel and just pull it right off. Now in some cases, the whole membrane of the whole back of the ribs will come off, but in this case, only a little piece came off. So I'm going to have to keep pulling the membrane until the entire back part of the ribs is membrane free. Once the whole membrane has been removed, it's time to rub the meat with the spice mix. You want to be very generous with the spice rub and make sure that every single little piece of meat is covered. Now you want to sprinkle the spice rub from high above so you get some even coverage on the meat. So keep sprinkling that rub on the meat until it is all covered. And it is just as important to rub the top as it is to rub the bottom. So go ahead, flip those ribs and keep sprinkling. Now it may seem like we have some extra on there, but after we let it sit for about 10 to 15 minutes, some of that sugar and salt will dissolve and will help the rub stick to the meat. Some people like to rub mustard on the meat before rubbing it with the spice mix, but I don't think it's necessary. This is what your ribs should look like after 10 to 15 minutes with the rub sitting on them. Nice and wet, and all of the rub should be sticking very nicely to it. And now, it's time to cook the meat. You want to line a baking tray with a cooling rack. Make sure that cooling rack is oven proof. The reason why you want to put the ribs on a rack and not directly on the tray is so you get better air circulation and the meat cooks more evenly. Once they're on the rack, take the excess rub from the tray and sprinkle it on top. And that's it. Pop those ribs in an oven preheated to 250 degrees Fahrenheit. The ribs should take about 3 hours to cook, so in the meantime, we'll make our sauce. In a small pan, throw 2 tablespoons of butter along with 4 garlic cloves and a quarter onion that's been cut into medium pieces. We're going to roast this garlic and onion in the butter until it's nicely browned. You want to give it a little stir every now and then to make sure the onions and garlic roast and don't burn. Once everything in the pot is nice and brown, you're going to add 48 grams of ketchup as well as 12 grams of yellow mustard and 12 grams of apple cider vinegar. Give everything a nice little stir to make sure it's nicely combined. Turn the heat down and add 20 grams of brown sugar about a teaspoon of Tabasco. You can definitely add more if you want it more spicy. And about a tablespoon of Worcestershire. Then you're going to squeeze half a lemon into the sauce. Make sure there's no seeds going into the sauce. And then you're going to give it a little stir again. Make sure the sauce is on low heat because it's got a lot of sugar and it can burn very easily. Give it a little stir and then cook it on low heat for about half an hour. After your sauce has been simmering for about half an hour, it should be nice and thick. But there's a lot of chunks of things in there. So we're going to strain this sauce through a fine mesh to make sure we have a very smooth sauce. And voila, sauce is done. Now all we gotta do is wait for the ribs to be done. These ribs have been cooking for about 2.5 hours, but depending on the size of your ribs, as well as the temperature of your oven, your ribs might take a little longer or shorter to cook. The best way to tell if your ribs are ready to be sauced is to look at the meat. If you can see it pulling a little bit from the bones, and they have a little bit of a flex when you pick them up from the middle, just like that, they are definitely ready to be sauced. Because once they're sauced, they're going to go back in the oven and keep cooking for about half an hour. Now, the best way to rub on that thick sauce you made is to use a pastry brush. So take a little bit of that sauce and rub it on. At this point, the sauce should be pretty thick from all the sugar and butter that went into it. But once it hits the ribs, it'll become nice and soft again. So keep brushing that sauce until every single square inch of the ribs is completely covered with sauce. Then flip your ribs and do the exact same process. Take your pastry brush and rub on that sauce until all the sauce is on the ribs. And once your ribs look nice and shiny like these, back in the oven they go for about half an hour. After about 3 hours to 3 hours and 15 minutes of cooking time, your ribs will be ready to get wrapped. The best way to tell if the sauce has set is to touch them with your bare finger, and if no sauce is stuck to your finger, the sauce is good to go. So take the ribs, place them on a piece of foil, then take a couple knobs of butter, put them on top of the ribs like that, and then we're going to wrap the entire thing in the foil to wrap them. And just like any meat, ribs are always best when properly rested. So we're going to rest them for about half an hour to 45 minutes. You definitely want to keep them in a warm spot so they don't get cold. Now, if you'd like your ribs to be falling off the bone literally, don't put any butter in the foil and pop them in the oven for about another hour and then rest your ribs. After about half an hour of resting at room temperature, the ribs are good. See how they flex? That means they're going to be super tender, but not falling apart. And look at that glaze, super nice and shiny. Now, let's cut into these ribs and see how they turned out. If everything went well, these ribs should be very juicy and tender. And look at all those juices. That looks mouth-watering, if you ask me. And now, let's try to pull some meat off the bone and see how tender they are. And see how they come right off the bone, and the bone is nice and clean. That's what you're looking for. And again, if you want them more tender, just cook them for an extra hour. No big deal. And there you have it. Shiny, beautifully glazed ribs. Meat that falls right off the bone. And everything done right at home without the need of a fancy smoker. Comment below what you think I should make next. Like this video, subscribe, and I'll see you guys soon. Thanks for watching.